This is a video tutorial to GOC CDC Series 9. I will be going over all the problems and the implementations as well. The implementation will be in C++. So let's start with the first problem. I will be attempting the problems in increasing order of difficulty as I found them to be, rather than the order in which they appeared. So let's start with the first problem, count binary substring. So a binary string is a string which consists of only zeros and ones, and a substring of this is defined as some contiguous segment, right? So you're given a binary string S, and you want to find the number of substrings which contain an equal number of zeros and ones, and another condition is that all the zeros and ones should be grouped together. So let's look at the problem. So we are given a string S, and let's look at the sample first. Let's say 0 1 1 0 0 1, right? So we want to look at substrings. We want to look at substrings which have an equal number of zeros and ones, and the zeros and ones should be grouped together, which means that we have two possibilities. One is that we get some zeros and then ones, or the another possibility is that we get some ones first and then some zeros, right? So in this particular sample test case that we are given, we can see that there are four such substrings, right? The first one being 0 1 0 1, then we have this 1 1 0 0 1 1 0 0, and then we would have this 1 0, this smaller one 1 0, and finally we would have 0 1, right? These are the four substrings which we have to count, and you can see that there are no other substrings which would satisfy both the conditions of equal zeros and ones and being grouped together. Now, moving on to solving the problem. The first observation that we want to make is that there are only two possibilities or two configurations in which the answer can exist. Is that we have some, say, x number of zeros followed by y number of ones, right? Or we could have x number of ones followed by y number of zeros. In either case, the answer, that is the number of substrings that we could have made, would be equal to the min of x and y. Hope you can visualize why this is true, because let's look at this one, 1 1 0 0. So if 1 1 0 0 is true, if it has equal number of zeros and ones, now if I just remove this first one and I remove this last zero, right, that is I have removed an equal number of zeros and ones from the prefix and the suffix. So what I'm left with is still an equal number of zeros and ones, and they would still be grouped together, making it a valid substring, right? So this is the case over here. When we have x zeros in the prefix and y ones in the suffix, then it would be equal for min of x comma y. So let's remove those excess ones or excess zeros that we have to ensure that, let's say we have exactly z zeros and z ones, where we see that z is equals to the min of x and y, right? Sorry, right? So we have z zeros and z ones. Now if I take out 1 0 and 1 from the end, I would be left with z minus 1 zeros and z minus 1 ones. This is still a valid substring. So overall, how many substrings we would have for this particular configuration? We would have z such substrings. So this is all that we have to do. We have to count what is the length of each contiguous segment of zeros and the length of each contiguous segment of ones, and we would just keep pairing the adjacent 0, 1 pairs or 1, 0 pairs. Now let's write the code for this. We have t test cases, and in each test case we are given a string s as the input. So I'm using a default template, but there's not much to it. As you can see, it's just that I'll be taking some test cases, and for each test cases we'll be calling the solve function, which actually solves for a given test case. Let's take the input string in, say, s, and n is the length of the string. So for counting the number of contiguous zeros or the contiguous ones, I would be maintaining kind of a two-pointer approach, where the first pointer is I, which is set as I equal to 0. So while I is less than n, right, I want to find, starting from I, what is the first contiguous segment of equal character, which has the same character. So let's store this I in a j, and while j is less than n, and the character at s of j is same as the character at s of I, right? So this would give me a contiguous segment. So until the time this condition is true, I want to increment the pointer j. So I is fixed and j is moving ahead, right? What is the count of the same number of characters? The count is j minus I. Now, when I'm doing this, I want to know, now these are all equal characters. This means that whatever was the previous segment of equal characters, that character was different. So if this segment was of zeros, the previous segment must have been of ones. And if I know the count of how many ones I had in the previous segment, and I already know the count of zeros in this particular segment, then I know in the final answer what would be the contribution. How many 1-0 pairs substrings of the configuration of ones and zeros would I have, right? That would be the minimum of the two counts. So I need to also maintain what was the previous count. So let's call it last count. And initially, since we do not have any segment, so last count is initialized with the value 0, right? And we also want the answer. How many segments do we have? So in the answer, the contribution would be the min of count and last count, right? And after this, we will update last count with count. So since after this we will be moving ahead, so now this current segment would become the previous segment, and in the next iteration when we enter the loop, we will be finding the next segment of equal characters of the same character, right? So we need to update pointer I as well. In this loop, when j is incrementing, it goes till the point till sj is equal to s of I. So the moment it breaks, that particular j would be the s of j that is not equal to I, and the next time when I enter the loop, I would like to continue from that point onwards, right? This is all that there is for this problem, and we would just output the answer from here. Let's run it and check if we have written the correct code. I'll be commenting out this part because this does not work on HackerRank. So we can see that we have passed the sample test cases, and let's submit it. Okay, so we are done with this question. Count binary substrings. I hope the solution to this is clear. It was a fairly easy question. Now let's move on to the next easier problem, that is favorite fraction. So you're given a quiz on an online platform, and till now you have solved B number of problems. Out of these B number of problems, you have solved A of them correctly. So your current score is given as A by B, the fraction A divided by B. And they are saying that your favorite fraction is X by Y. So we have to find the minimum number of problems that we need to solve to reach the favorite fraction. And every next problem that we solve, we have the choice to either solve it correctly or incorrectly, right? And it is given that x and y are co-primes, and if it is not possible to achieve this favorite fraction, then we are supposed to print -1. So let's first break down the problem, right? So we have solved A correctly out of B questions, and our current score is given as A by B, right? And the target score that we want to achieve is x by y. Few things to note over here would be that they have mentioned that x and y are co-primes. Now, what does this mean? When we say that x and y are co-primes, it means that the GCD of x and y should be 1. The greatest common divisor is 1. Now, this tells us that this fraction x by y, this is in its irreducible form, right? It cannot be reduced further. So, as an example, if I say that I have the fraction 4 by 8, then I know that the GCD of 4 and 8 is equals to 4. Now this means that this fraction 4 by 8 can be reduced. Both the numerator and the denominator can be divided by the greatest common divisors, and this will yield us the irreducible fraction 1 by 2, right? To solve this problem, we are saying that we can solve more questions than B, and every next question, either we can solve it correctly or incorrectly, which means that from a current score of A by B, either we can go to A plus 1 divided by B, A plus 1 divided by B plus 1, right? This means that the next question that we solved after B, we solved it correctly. Or we could go to A by B plus 1. That is the next question that we solved. We did it incorrectly, right? Now the problem is that using this approach, I might be thinking like, now there will be a lot of states, right? Because A and B, they are all in the range of 10 power 9. So definitely we cannot go the brute force way where from each A by B I try to see if I can go to this one or this one, and through which path I will ultimately end up at the target score of x by y, and which path would give me the minimum number of problems that I have to solve, that is the denominator. The better way to approach this question would be if I start thinking in the opposite direction. Like, let's say that I have the target score x by y, right? And this is in the irreducible form. So this means that the same fraction could have been obtained by 2x divided by 2y, or it could have been obtained from 3x divided by 3y, or in general, I could say that if I multiply both the numerator and the denominator with the same factor n, say capital N, right, then this fraction nx divided by ny, this is same as the irreducible fraction x by y. So if starting from the score A by B, if I manage to reach upon a score of the general form nx divided by ny, then I have finally reached at the target score of x by y. And whatever was the steps that I required to reach till this score, that is the minimum number of steps, right? So we have to find such an n that minimizes the number of steps. Now another very important observation over here, or rather a demand of the question itself, is that we have already solved B questions, and there is no way that, like, we have already answered those B questions. There is no way that we can change an already existing answer. The only way to move forward is that we solve a new question, and either we can solve it correctly or incorrectly, which means that the denominator in any case increases and the numerator either remains constant or it increases. It cannot decrease from, the numerator cannot decrease from A and the denominator cannot decrease from B. So now this means that we have a few, like we can write a few equations. So whatever, like we do not know what is the capital N right now, but whatever it be, we know that n into x should be greater than equal to a. This is for sure, right? Whatever be the denominator, that is n into y, this should be greater than equal to b, the total number of questions that I have attempted, and a being the number of questions that are correctly answered. But these two conditions are not enough to solve the problem. There is another condition that we have not taken into consideration, and that is, for every problem that I attempt, either I answer it correctly or I answer it incorrectly. This means that the number of questions that I have answered correctly, this means that the number of questions that I have answered correctly is definitely less than equal to the number of questions that I have attempted, right? And this is what is also given in the constraints. A is less than equal to B, X is less than equal to Y, right? You cannot answer more questions correctly than you have attempted. So in the fraction that the target score that we reach, that is the fraction n into x divided by n into y. So the total question that we have attempted is n into y, right? So how many more questions did we attempt? We attempted n into y minus b number of questions we attempted more, right? This is the count of the questions that we have attempted, and this is greater than equal to the number of questions that we have answered correctly, the extra questions that we have attempted correctly, that is n into x minus a, right? And this is something that we could have directly also derived from here by subtracting these two inequalities, right? Because this, when you bring the n into x to the LHS and you simplify it, it turns out to be n into y minus n into x is greater than equal to b minus a, right? And if I further simplify it, then I get as n is greater than equal to minus a divided by 5 minus x, right? And since x is less than equal to y, we know that y minus x is a positive quantity. So this is one equation that we have got. The another equation was over here, where n into x is greater than equal to a. We can rewrite this as n is greater than equal to a by x. And similarly, this one we can rewrite as n is greater than equal to b by y. These three inequalities, they give us the correct answer. They are sufficient to solve the problem, right? Now the question that we are left with is, what should be the value of n? And we know that we have to minimize the number of questions that we attempt more, right? Find the minimum number of problems that we need to solve more. We have already solved b of them. How many more do we need to solve? And this is given by the count of n into y divided by b, right? This is our answer. So we know that b is a constant and y is a constant because they're already given in the question and they do not change. So we have to find this n such that this answer minimizes. So this means that we have to find the value of n into y as close as possible to b, but it should still be greater, right? This cannot be negative for sure because we have attempted more problems. So either it is 0 or it is some positive quantity, and we have to minimize that. So from these three equations, whatever was the n value that we have got, I think I erased that last inequality. B minus A divided by Y minus X. So using these three inequalities, this one, and this one, we can get this. These are all greater than equal to, right? So we can find like what is the minimum value of n that satisfies this equation, that satisfies this, and that satisfies this, and the maximum of all the three, that would give me the ideal or optimal value of n, which would minimize the answer. So we can see that this was a straightforward math question that involved dealing with three inequalities and solving them. And looking at the constraints, we already had a hint that we probably require some order 1 solution, right? Because it goes till 10 power 9 and test cases are till 1000. So there's nothing much to do over here. This question was purely based on math and it is pretty easy to code now. So we will take the number of test cases as the input and let's quickly. So we have A, B, X and Y. And I'll use the same variable name n that I've used while describing the problem. So we want this n to be the max of three minimum values, that is a by x, b by y, and this one. And so since this may not be uh, exactly an integral value, so we need to take a ceil over here. So either you can use the inbuilt ceil function or you could write it in this form. Right? And since we are taking a max of three quantities, so I will use this implementation data, right? Max function in C++ is actually overloaded, and if we want to take the max of more than two values, we can put all the values inside a brace enclosed inside these curly braces, right? So now we have to take the ceil of b by y, so that is b plus y minus 1 divided by y, and the last value is b minus a plus y minus 1 divided by y minus x, right? And but we are not done with the problem yet. Now this is a tricky problem because this involves a few corner cases that we have to take into consideration, right? So in the case, now you can see that we are dividing by y minus x, right? So a quick corner case that comes in mind is, what if it is 0? So we cannot divide by 0, right? So we need to take the case if y is equal to x. If y is equal to x, any fraction of the form x by x is reduced till 1 by 1, right? And since we were given that they are co-prime, so we have to reach the score 1 by 1. And the only possible way to reach 1 by 1 is that the initial score a by b, that should remain, that should be 1 by 1 as well, right? Because we know that from a by b, we can go to a plus 1 by b plus 1. So you see that both the numerator and the denominator have increased. So if they both have increased, then there is no way that this particular path would lead us anywhere close to x by x, right? Or 1 by 1. And similarly in this path, the denominator keeps increasing. So if initially if a was less than b, then a would always remain less than b. So we can never get a answer. So unless a was already equal to b, in which case we do not need to do anything, we already have the answer. And if it is not so, then we have to print -1. This was one case and we directly return. Now another case is when this a is 0 and x is 0, right? We already given that the denominators are greater than 0 already, that is b and y. So if the numerator is 0 right? Then we can only get an answer if A is initially 0. Because if A is, because like I said, A never decreases. It either remains constant or it increases. So if it has to remain constant, then I do not have to do anything, right? Because it is already 0. So the case that I have to consider is if x is equal to 0, right? Then if A is also 0, then the answer is 0 because we do not have to do anything. But if A is positive, then there is no way that I could have decreased it, and hence the answer should be -1. So that's all for this problem, and let's try to submit it. Okay, I have missed out on something. It says that the answer is 7. Okay. We did not have to print the value of n, we actually had to print how many more problems did we solve. So that is n into y minus b. And let's look at another thing that b minus a is 10 power 9 at max, y minus x is 10 power 9. Okay, so we would always remain in the range of int, right? So this value could go at max. It's not that, so let's keep it in long now. Okay. So we pass the sample test cases and let's submit it. Okay, we have solved this problem, and yeah, I think this one was an easy one. We just had to stick with some maths and find out the three inequalities. Okay, uh, let's move to the next problem. Yeah, I think this one is good. Kill the Night King. So let me break down the problem quickly. We have some dagger which can do two types of damage. uh, we have an enemy which has the height, which has some health points, say h. Either we can decrease this health point by 1, or we can decrease the health to h1, where we can denote h as equal to h1 into h2. And it is also given that h1 is greater than or equal to h2 and h2 is greater than 1. And we have to find the minimum number of stabs or the minimum number of steps that we have to do to bring down the health to 0, right? And this is in the order of 10 to the power 6. Yeah. So h is written as h1 into h2. So the first thing we see is that it is some divisor of h, right? h1 and h2, they both divide h, and both of them are greater than 1, right? So the first thing that really comes to mind is that, let's say that if I have some function f of h which tells me what is the minimum number of stabs required to make the health h go all the way to 0, right? So if I'm at h, then they tell me that I have two options, either I can do this or I can do this. Okay, and I have to find the minimum out of that. So this means that from f of h, either I get the answer from f of h minus 1, right? I decrease the health by 1 point, or I decrease the health till h1, where this condition should hold. So f of h1, and I did one stab, so I have to account for that, so plus 1 for that. And where h1 into h2 is equal to h, and h1 is greater than or equal to h2, which is greater than 1. Now if you look closely, if you look closely, we already have a recurrence relation, and it is very easy to see that we have recurring subproblems, right? F of h minus 1, f of h1. It is the same problem, just an easier or a smaller version of it. And this hints us to use dynamic programming over here. If I somehow knew the answer of f of h minus 1 already, and if I somehow knew all the answers for all the h1s that satisfy these two conditions, right? If I knew all those values, then I could very easily compute the minimum of them in order one time and add a plus one to that, right? So now there are two ways to go about this. So generally when we are going over in a transition from a particular state to another state, if that state is a divisor, right? From h we are going to h1, where h1 is the divisor of h. So a good general idea of solving these problems is to write an iterative dynamic programming solution. And the second is that from a state dp of h. So let's say if I say that I'm at a state dp of h, then from this I would want to go to some multiple of h, right? Instead of going in the backward direction, where from h to h1 or from a device from the particular number to a divisor, instead of going in the backward direction, I would like to go in the forward direction. Why is that? So I've already solved the problem, then this thing will become clear to you, or after looking or after I will explain the solution, then you can again see this part. So when we actually move backwards, so any number n is said to have order n to the power 1 by 3 divisors, right? And since over here the h is going till 10 power 6, so if I were to keep iterating over all the divisors of n, then it would probably time out, right? Because this is still a big value. However, if I iterate on multiples, then the number of multiples that I can reach, like the overall time complexity, turns out to be order of n log n, right? So I think if you have used a sieve of Eratosthenes ever, then this part should be very clear. Or if you have ever iterated over multiples of a number, right? Let me quickly go over that. So if I'm at standing at n, right, and if I go till uh, let's say 2 into n, or then I go till 4 into n. This way I go till k, right? I go to say n into some capital N, all the devices till certain point, and this I will be doing for all n in the range of 1 to capital N, right? I want to go till some multiple, it may not be exactly n, but this is the endpoint. Till here I want to go, and I would be iterating over all multiples of all numbers in this range from 1 to capital N, right? And I say that the of this is n log n, right? Why is this? Why is this? From 2n I would be going to 3n and then 4n and 5n. So this is order n log n because when we are iterating over multiples and we are going to a particular value, you might as well say that from that particular n, for each n in this range, I would be going over all the factors or all the divisors, right? And for any number uh, capital N, it has n to the power 1 by 3 divisors. That is true, right? But what I can also say is that I can go till n by 2. From n I can go till n by 2, and then from n by 2 I can go till n by 4. Basically, if I can write n as this in its prime factorization, that is p1 to the power of k1 into p2 to the power of k2 and so on and so forth, right? When would it have the maximum number of divisors? When p1 would be the smallest, when any one prime factor is the smallest, and we know that the smallest prime factor is 2. So if I can express n as some 2 to the power k, it may not be exactly 2 to the power k, it may not be entirely divisible by this, but whatever it be, I would have at max log n, right? Log base n factors, and a summation of this from for all n in the range of 1 to n. So instead of taking the exact value of summation of log of n for each n in the range of 1 to capital N, I could say that all of them were capital N, right? Because when we are talking in the order notation, we are talking about the in the range when n tends to infinity, right? Since it is order n, so it has to be less than equal to some function which is always greater. So then from that we derive that the complexity should be n log n, right? That and let's actually get to the solution. Say that we take in the health that we have, the original health, right? And in the range of 26. So I will be declaring a global array and I will be calling it db. Few base cases are that we know that when for one health point there is only one way of doing it, that we just decrease it by 1, right? And for any other dp we have to calculate it. So we start from the health point 2. Let's denote it as a HP. From HP equal to 2 we start, and we go all the way till capital H. That is the actual answer that we wanted to get. So at this point I want to find out the value of dp of HP. This is the value that I want to find, right? And after finding this particular value, I would also want to update all the multiples, right? From this particular state of HP, from here, all possible states to which I can go, I would like to update those particular values as well, right? So let's say, like, if this dp has not been initialized till now, if the value of this is 0, then I know that this is some probably prime number which I have not reached till now, because when I'm iterating over the multiples, I've already covered some values, but I would have never touched upon a prime number, right? In that case, the answer for dp of HP would be dp of HP minus 1 plus 1, right? Else I know that probably some multiple in the past has already given some contribution to this particular dp state, right? So I would like to minimize the answer that I have over here. I take the minimum of dp of HP and dp of HP minus 1 plus 1, right? These are the only, this is the dp of HP minus 1, this is the only shade that was missing, because we have already covered all the devices, right? Because from this state, when I move to the multiples in the future, and then when I reach upon that particular multiple, then I already know that all the devices are less than this particular number, so they have already occurred in the past, and I have already computed the value and stored it in the dp, right? And their contribution have already been taken. So I know that I have successfully computed the value of this particular state of health. Now I need to iterate over all the multiples. So let's iterate over the multiples. We know that this multiple would only go till this particular value. Why is that? Why is that? Let's first write this down and then this will become clear. Right? So it has not been initialized, then we initialize it for the first time. dp of hp plus 1 step. Otherwise, we would have to take a minimum. Yes. So now, can we ever update, can this dp of hp ever affect any multiple which is greater than that? So if you remember this particular condition, h1 greater than equal to h2, right? So in this, we were going from f of h, we were going to f of h1. We were not going to f of h2. So this h1 has to be greater. And this particular number multiples into hp. This is written in the form of h1 into h2, right? And I know that I'm deriving my answer from dp of hp. So this has to be my h1. And if this has to be my h1, then this has to be greater than equal to this. And therefore, h1 is greater than equal to h2. So we would only be going till this point, right? So that is all for the solution. We have successfully computed this dp state and we have made all the transitions that are possible and updated all possible future values. So our final answer would come from the dp of h. And I think that is all that we have to do. Let's run it on the sample. So for 8 we have the answer 4. From 8 we, as they have mentioned, from 8 we go to 4 and then to 2 and then finally we decrease twice to get to 0. Submit the solution and see if it is correct. Okay, we have a lot of test cases. We're getting some segmentation faults. Okay. Okay, so I did not consider the case where multiples into HP could actually be beyond the entire limit. So we need to account for that. I'm sorry for that. Let's quickly take that into consideration. Yeah, I think this should be good. Yes. Okay, so we have passed this as well. We still have 3 questions remaining and let's start with this one. Hogwarts and Voldemort. Voldemort is looking for Harry Potter and so he went to Hogwarts school, and to prevent them from entering, there are n+1 teachers and they form a magical boundary. A magical boundary is a straight line from position 0 to n and it should be continuous till the nth position. Okay, and each teacher has a certain power. If the power of the I teacher is power I, then he can protect from I minus power I to I plus power I, both inclusive, and we have to find the minimum number of teachers that are required to form this entire boundary. And if it is impossible to do so, we should print -1. Okay. That comes to mind is that each teacher can protect from I minus power I till I plus power I. And we have to cover the range 0 to n. So this first thing that comes to mind is that if I minus power I, if it goes beyond 0, if it goes to -1 or -2, we do not care. As long as it covers till 0, we are good. We don't care if it goes beyond 0. And same with I plus power I. If it goes beyond L till beyond n till n plus 1 or n plus 2, we do not care about that as well. That's the first thing, right? So now basically each teacher can be thought of as a segment that is covering from the range Li to Ri, right? And we want to find the minimum number of segments, the entire range is covered. Now generally in such type of problems, when we are talking about segments, we would like to move in some sort of an uh, increasing, like a linear sweep, right, in a sorted fashion of the segments in ascending order. So if I'm moving from 0 to n, and when I'm standing at the 0th point, I would like to find out if there is some segment which covers it, right? To the left of point 0, I do not have anything. So there must be some segment that definitely covers point 0 if an answer exists. So let's say that there are multiple segments which are covering point 0. How do I decide which particular segment to take? The claim I make is that it is optimal to take the segment that extends farthest to the right. I say that if there are multiple segments covering the point 0, then I take the segment that extends farthest to the right. And it is actually very intuitive if you think about it. Like if I have multiple segments and I want to cover an entire range of 0 to n, so I have a greedy choice, right? I would naturally take the segment which gives me a coverage till a longer distance, right? And let's actually prove it formally. So a formal proof for this, it actually goes this way. So let's say that if I have an optimal solution, in which point P is covered by a segment, let's say capital S, right, which extended from LS to RS. And if I had an optimal solution in which point P was covered by a segment capital S, and there exists another segment, let's say capital S dash, which was not part of the optimal solution, which was not part of the optimal solution, but capital S dash extends from, let's say, LS dash to RS dash, such that RS dash is greater than LS dash. Oh, sorry. Such that RS dash is greater than RS, right? If I have an optimal solution in which point P is covered by a segment this, and there exists another segment S dash, which was not part of the optimal solution, but this. Okay. Uh, and let's say that all points to the left of P were already covered by some other segments, right? So let's say that the segment S actually started from the point P. And let's say that this S dash, this also starts from point P, right? This is what I wanted to prove. If I have a segment that starts at this particular point, and if I have to take this and all previous points are already covered, then it makes sense to take the segment which extends farthest to the right. So RS dash is greater than RS. So let's say that I replace the segment S dash, that I replace the segment S with S dash in optimal solution. If I did this, then would the answer change? The answer would not change because all points to the left of point P are already covered by some other set of segments, right? And this point P was covered by a segment which extended till RS, and all points greater than RS are also already covered because this was an optimal solution. So the answer existed, right? And now if I remove this segment S and I replace it with another segment S dash, which not only covers the range of P to RS, but it extends beyond that, then the answer would not change, right? So therefore, the greedy strategy that I propose is that we start moving in an increasing order from 0 to n, and at each point that is not covered already, we take the segment that starts at this point or before. We do not care when it started. We want to take the segment that goes as to the right as possible. So that is the logic for this particular question, and then let's start writing the code for it. So we have some test cases. Okay. We have n plus 1 teachers, right? So we are given n, and each has certain power, and there are n plus 1 such teachers. So let's take the input powers for them. And now for each particular point, I need to find out what is the largest segment, right? So let's maintain an array endpoint n plus 1, where endpoint I tells us the largest segment starting at point I and ending farthest to the right. Right? So it is, we can move this. It is the segment starting at point I and ending farthest to the right. So it stores the endpoint of that. So let's compute this. So we go over all the teachers, and we know that the left endpoint of that particular segment represented by the teacher, it is given by I minus power of I, and the right endpoint is given by I plus power of I. Now, like I had said in the beginning, we do not care if this particular value is less than 0. We can directly take a max with 0. If it is less than 0, we can replace it with 0. As simple as that, right? And the same goes for the right endpoint. So we replace it with the min of n. We take a minimum of n. So basically, if it is n plus 1 or n plus 2, we say that it's fine to take it just as n. Now I need to find out the endpoint of L. So the endpoint of L is given as R, and this I want to maximize. So there might be multiple such indices I, such that I minus power I gives us the same value of L, right? That is possible. So we would have to maximize endpoint of L, and we take the max of the value and R. And initially we should set it as 0. Initially let's set it as minus 1, right? Because I does not have any segment starting at that point, then we would say that its value is set as minus 1 because all other endpoints are strictly non-negative. Right. So now let's think of the case when the answer is not possible. If the answer is impossible, then it means that there exists a certain point P such that no segment starting at a position less than or equal to P that is greater than equal to P. Right? I hope this makes sense. Any segment had to start before P, right? and it had to end after P. So if this does not happen for any single point, then we say that the answer is impossible and we must print the answer as -1. So for doing this, let's slightly modify the definition of endpoint I. So instead of saying that it is the segment starting at point I, let's say it consists of all the segments that start at a point less than or equal to I, and they end farthest to the right. So for doing that, we can simply take a prefix maximum, right? We can simply take a prefix maximum. The endpoint of I would be the max of its current value and the endpoint of any segment that started at the previous value. Now we check if the answer is impossible. So we go over each point and we check, or let's write it as point so it is more clear. So we go over each point. We say that if this point, so in the definition of endpoint I have already included the fact that the segment is starting at a position less than equal to P, right? So all we have to check is if the endpoint is greater than equal to P. Point of this particular point, if it is greater than equal to P, then we are good to go. But if it is less than point, then we know that the answer is not possible and we should print a -1, and we can simply return from here. Otherwise, if the answer does exist, then we start at point 0 and then we can directly jump to the endpoint of that particular point, right? So we can directly jump to the endpoint of a segment that started at point 0 and ended as far to the right as possible. And then from that particular point, we again make another jump to the endpoint of that point, right? Which includes all the segments that started on or before the endpoint of 0. So let's write that from 0 I go to endpoint of 0, right? And from here I would go to the endpoint of 0, and we keep doing this until we reach n, right? And so we made one jump, two jumps, and so on. So as many points as we have, that many jumps we will make, right? Okay, and one slight implementation detail that I forgot to take care of is that over here point less than equal to n, right? And for the nth point, since we have already covered the nth point, we don't care about any segment that starts at it or ends wherever, right? If we are able to reach that point, then it is sufficient. So what we can do is we can set the endpoint of n as n plus 1, right? And we should only be checking this till less than n, because it might so happen that we started some, okay fine, this is still less than equal to, since we have taken the prefix maximum, so this is fine. And over here we can set the endpoint of n as n plus 1, and then we start from point 0, point is less than equal to n, and we update point as endpoint of point, right? And every time we increment the answer. And finally, the number of jumps or the number of steps that we made was equal to answer minus 1. So I hope this solution is clear, and so let's run it on the sample input and then we will submit it. One jump, and that is correct. And test case. we're good to go, and let's submit this. Comment this and yeah, submit. Right? Okay, terminated due to timeout. So I think I've missed something over here, and okay. So n was going to 2 into 10 to the power 6, and so let's just go over it once again. For each point, I check if the endpoint is less than point. Like this, if I return -1, and all this is good. The only place where we could have gotten a timeout is if this ran into an infinite loop, right? Okay, so I missed this particular case, yeah. If endpoint of point, if it is actually equal to point itself, if it is actually equal to the point itself, even then the answer is not possible, right? Because we have to cover the entire range from 0 to n. This includes all the intermediary ranges as well, right? Between some I and I plus 1. It's not like if I end the segment at I, if I can cover till point I, then I directly start from the point I plus 1. No, I need to cover the range which starts at exclusive of I, and goes till n inclusive, right? So the endpoint of point, it has to be greater than point, otherwise it is impossible. So this was the case that was missing. Now this should. What is the problem? So let's run it on the sample again. I'm getting -1. That should not have happened. Okay, yeah, and because of this, then I need to change this as well, right? Because uh, if the solution does exist, then endpoint of the nth point, that would be n, right? Because this r, since we have taken a min with n, so for any particular index in endpoint of I, we can never have it greater than n. So for point equal to n, this condition would always hold and we would always get a -1, right? So it makes sense to make it less than n to check only till that point, and then we have all this condition already over here to account for this inequality. Let's run it on the sample before we submit. 3. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. So this works, and now we are left with the final two questions. Okay, so I think the break. Stop the recording and check. Start recording this. Yeah. Okay, so saving energy one. This is a nice question. So in this what we are given is that we have a 2D matrix of size n cross n and each cell has a positive value aij. So when I visit a cell aij, I gain certain amount of energy which is equal to the value of the cell, and when I move from one row to the next row, then I lose mod of j minus k amount of energy. That is the absolute difference between the two columns in the ith row and the I plus 1th row, right? So now I start my journey from any column in the first row, and initially I start with zero energy. I need to tell that at the end of the energy, what would be the maximum amount of energy that I'm left with, right? And the size of n is given as 2000, aij is 10 power 5. Okay, so and we should note that the value of aij is positive. What this tells us is that go from the column of I comma j to I plus 1 comma k, right? I'm losing out on energy equal to the absolute difference between j and k. And I start my journey at from I is equals to 0, right? And I have to tell what is the maximum amount of energy that I'm left with at the end of the journey. So they do not mention where I'm ending the journey. Acha, your journey ends when you have visited one cell from each row. Okay, okay. So from 0 we have to go to n minus 1. Okay. So if we of each particular cell in that matrix as let's say a node of a graph, right? Then from each node, from each column in that particular row, I can go to the next row and I have n options to where I can go, right? So basically from that one node, I have n edges coming out to the next state, right? So this immediately gives us kind of an sub problem, a recurring sub problem that is similar and even smaller. So if I have a function which tells me what is the maximum amount of energy that I can get if I started my journey from the first row, from any column in the first row, and I ended at the ith row and the jth column. What is the maximum energy that I'm left with? So if you think about it, that for the this f of I comma j, if I know this answer for all particular columns in the ith row, right? So this describes my journey from the first row to the ith row. Now the journey from the first row to the ith row is independent of the journey from the first row to the I plus 1th row, right? I do not care what are the values in the I plus 1th row or beyond that. If I was given a matrix that was only from the first row till the ith row, then I can compute the answer from that without knowing the information about the I plus 1 and I plus 2 rows, right? So we can see that we have a similar sub problem, and this hints us at using some kind of a dynamic programming solution, right? So what the trivial solution that instantly comes to mind is that when I'm standing at f of I comma j, then from which row did I come from? I came from the I minus 1th row, but I do not know which column I came from. So we had n options to come from. So let's say I would iterate on each column. So let's say that I came from the I minus 1 comma kth position to the I comma jth position, right? And in doing so, I lost mod of j minus k energy. This is the amount of energy that I lose. And at the same time, coming at the I comma jth position, I gain aij amount of energy, right? So if somehow I knew the answer of f of I minus 1 comma k already, if I knew this answer already, then I could easily calculate the value of f of I comma j, right? So this is a clear dynamic programming solution, and I think these states over here are also pretty clear. So let's see what would be the complexity of this, right? So we have I comma j, we have two states, the row and the column. So this definition of a state, right? And from this particular one state, we can go till n different states, right? We have n possible transitions. So this would lead us to an order n cube solution. The entire DP table would be of n cross n because we want to find the answer for each row comma column, right? Because f of I comma j depends on the previous value. If we know the value of the previous row, then we can compute this. So we have n square states to compute, and from each state I have n possible transitions. So if I was iterating over each k, then that would be order of n, right? So we have order n square into n, which is order n cube. But if you look at the constraints that we have 10 test cases and n is till 2000, right? And they have given us that the sum of n overall test cases does not exceed 10 to the power 4. So clearly an n cube solution would not pass. So let's try to further optimize it. Now the optimization that comes over here is by breaking this modulus, right? If we did not have this modulus, let's say we just had that, you would incur a loss in energy equal to j minus k, right? If we did not have the modulus, then what we could have done is that in f of I minus 1 comma k, when we had computed this value in another auxiliary array, we could have stored the value of f of I minus 1 comma k plus k, right? F of I comma j would be equal to the maximum value of this particular, let's call it let's say let's give it another function named g, right? Let's call it g of I minus 1 comma k. Then f of I comma j would come from the maximum value of this g over all k, right? From the maximum value of this plus minus j plus aij. And this g of I minus 1 comma k, since this only depends on k, it does not have any influence of j. Therefore, what we can do is we can calculate the entire maximum for one whenever we were computing f of I minus 1 comma k for all particular k, we could have calculated this function g at the same time, right? We could have maintained the entire maximum for that particular I minus 1th row, and therefore we would get this value in order one time. So we have eliminated this into n factor. The n transitions that we had to do, we have eliminated them as a single transition by storing the maximum value itself, right? But this was the case if we did not have a modulus. But here we have a mod of j minus k. The thing over here is that the modulus, it has a single point of that inflection, right? The it has a V-like shape. So for all k that is less than equal to j, we know that j minus k would be some positive value, right? And the modulus function, since it always returns a positive value, so the modulus of a positive value would still be positive, right? So we can say that mod of j minus k would be equal to j minus k itself. And in the case that k is greater than j, in that case mod of j minus k, so this j minus k quantity, this is negative, so we have to return the absolute value of that. So that would be minus of j minus k, and this is nothing but k minus j, right? Yes. What does a function g of I minus 1 comma k look like? We basically want to have for each particular j, f of I comma j, I would like to find out this maximum of g I minus 1 comma k, but this k has to go till j, right? It has to go maximum till j. I want to find out this value, and this is nothing but f of I minus 1 comma k plus k, right? That is the case when k is greater than j, right? But over here k is less than equal to j, so we want to take minus k contribution. So this was the case that I explained, but over here we basically want two different functions. So one is let's remove this and let's call this g, where g we store is the maximum of f of I comma k. It is the maximum of f of I comma k, where I minus 1 comma k, where k is less than equal to j, and along this we store the value of minus k, right? It is the max of this particular thing. We would need another function h of, let's say, I minus 1, where k is greater than j. It obviously goes till the maximum column, and it would store the maximum of f of I minus 1 comma k, where it is greater than j plus k, right? So this particular part is accounted in the function h, and this particular part is accounted in the function g, right? So if you think about it, what are we basically doing? We need this k less than equal to j value for every j, right? So this is essentially, we want to maintain a prefix maximum. K is greater than j, and we want this value of h for every particular j. So this is nothing but a suffix maximum, right? So at every I comma j, if we want to find out this f of I comma j, all we have to do is take the maximum of this prefix maximum, that is the function g. We would add the current column value, that is plus j plus aij, and then another case would be the suffix maximum minus the current column plus aij, right? Okay, one small mistake over here that I would have to rectify is that this was for mod of j minus k, right? But this is the amount of energy that I actually lose out. So this would decrease the current energy. So we have to take a minus of this entire thing. So basically our functions g and h are swapped, right? Instead of taking a minus k over here, I should be taking a plus k over here, and I should be taking a minus k over here, because now this will become minus j plus k, and this will remain positive as j minus k, right? So let's go over it once again. We have to take a prefix maximum where g of I minus 1 comma k, where k goes only till j, and we have to find out the value of this function for all j, and for a particular j we get this value as, it is the max of f of I minus 1 comma k less than equal to j plus k, accounting for the case when we are losing out energy over here. Since k is less than equal to j, j minus k is positive, and it leads to a loss of energy equal to minus J plus K, right? So how it would look formally. By removing this order n transitions, we have achieved a time complexity of order n square, which is good enough to pass. So now let's code this up. We have t test cases, n is 2000, and we have aij values. Count for the test cases and n, and then we need an array, 2D array, so the values of the energy in each cell, right? Okay, and now I would need another array that stores the maximum energy till the I comma jth point, right? And I would also need an array for maintaining the prefix maximum of each row. Let's call it prefix max, and let's maintain a suffix max. Now, since we are starting the journey at the first row, so we already know the answer for that row, right? That is our base case. And value of the maximum energy at any such column would be equal to the energy that we derive from that cell, because we are starting our journey over there. So max energy 0 of I is equals to A of 0, right? And in our prefix array, for each column we are storing the, that is this particular one, we have to store the contribution of the maximum energy plus the column value, right? Maximum energy 0I plus I, and same goes to suffix max, where we take the negative of the column value. We will take the prefix and suffix maximums. Right, after doing this, now we have covered our base case. So now we will go over each row and find out the value of maximum energy for each column. So maximum energy of Ij would be equal to the max of two quantities like we mentioned, right? One is the prefix maximum of the previous row. So we have already calculated, and this stores the value of each column of the previous row, right? Of the first row. So for the jth column, this gives us the value of g of I minus 1j, which is this plus k. And now we have to account for the loss in energy due to moving to this column j. So we have to give a minus j to it, right? And we will, the next quantity is the suffix max column plus j, the contribution of plus j, right? And then due to landing on this cell I comma j, we further gain energy equal to the value of this cell, right? So after doing this, now we need to update the prefix and suffix arrays for the ith row. So basically I could have maintained this as a 2D table itself, where this would have been the 0 0 first row, and then I would be storing values of the next row. Instead of that, I have maintained them as a single one-dimensional array, and for after calculating the value of each row, I update the prefix maximum and suffix maximum arrays, and therefore in the next iteration when I am calculating the value of I plus 1, the prefix max and suffix max arrays would be storing the values of the previous row. So I hope there is no confusion with this implementation, right? So uh, if j is greater than 0, then this should be a prefix max of j minus 1, otherwise 0, and we would be adding max energy of ij to this, right? And similarly, we want to update the suffix array as well. J is equals to max energy ij plus, if j is equal to n minus 1, then we do not have anything. This we have to take the value of the suffix maximum of the j plus 1th column. Yeah, so this looks good to me, and finally we would have our answer as the maximum energy that we have till the in the last row. So we would have to iterate over all the columns and max of the maximum energy over all columns, right? So this is the last column, that is n minus 1 and j. And I think this is all for this problem. Let's try it on the sample test cases, and I think this should work. Let's see. Okay, we have some issue over here. Did I take test cases into account? Okay, I've taken the test cases, and suffix I plus 1. Okay, let's run. Okay, so we have some problem in this part. I is going to there. Prefix max of j minus j, suffix max of j plus aij. This looks good to me. Over here, if j is greater than 0, then we take this. Greater than 0, so I think that is all right. And it looks good to me. Maximum energy n minus 1. Okay, it works. J is equals to n minus 1. So if it is so, then we take 0. Otherwise, we take the suffix max of j plus 1. Okay, sorry. Okay, so now the answer is coming as 34, and the correct answer is 22. Okay. What have I missed over here is, okay, so in the prefix max I have forgotten to take this contribution of plus j and minus j over here, right? So for prefix max we were taking a contribution of plus I, so max of this plus j, and for suffix max we have to take minus j. Okay, There is still some problem. Oh shoot. We had to take the maximum, right? Why am I adding it to this? Okay, I'm so sorry about this. Yeah. So, stupid error, but value at j plus 1. 22, and we are good to go. Let's submit this. Okay. Now moving on to the final question, which I think is pretty good, but a lot of people have also solved it. So I think it wasn't that hard as well. Okay, so we are given T task, and in each task, Alice and Bob are playing a game with an airline network of N airports. At the start of the game, we do not have any airlines connecting any two airports. Okay, and Bob will then make M turns. In each of the next M turns, Bob selects two airports U and B and adds a two-way airline between these cities. Okay, and now Alice takes ownership of one of these airports and assigns the other one to Bob. Alright, and previous connections stay as it is with the next turn too. In some turns, Alice realizes that it is impossible to assign airports to her and Bob, and since Bob has made many turns, so Alice is asking for the maximum number of turns from the start of the game till which this assignment is possible. Okay, so let's take on this problem. We have n airports and airlines operating between two airports, like each one operating between a pair of airports. And so Bob is the one who's deciding where these airlines are operating from, to and from, and Alice is the one who's deciding which airport belongs to whom, right? So each airport, it belongs to either Alice or Bob, and whenever there is an airline uh, let's say airport U and V, between airports U and B, then either of them should go to Alice and the other should go to Bob. So if you think about this problem, you can clearly see that each airport is either belonging to Alice or to Bob, right? And there is a direct two-way airline between these two airports, one of which belongs to Alice and the other one to Bob. So essentially what this problem boils down to is that in the end, we want to have a bipartite graph, right? Why is it bipartite? Because every edge, every edge between U and V is such that U belongs to Alice and V belongs to Bob, right? We can say this without loss of generality, right? So in a bipartite graph, this is what we have, right? We have two sets of vertices and all the edges in the graph go from one set of vertices to the other one. There are no edges in, inside between pair of vertices of the same set, right? So if anyone does not know what a bipartite graph is, in a bipartite graph, all edges vertices of one set to another. There are no edges between, that is to say, there are no edges between pair of vertices of the same set, belonging to the same set, right? So now the question asks is, what the question asks us is, what is the maximum number of edges that we can add such that the resulting graph is bipartite? This is what the question is asking us, right? The airports are the nodes of the graph, and the airlines operating between a pair of airports are the edges, right? Each node or airport belongs to either Alice or Bob, and so Bob is adding m edges, and we want to find what is the maximum number of edges that we can add. Okay. Now, if you look at what happens when we add an edge, either the graph remains bipartite or it does not, right? So the moment the graph does not remain bipartite, so it would not be bipartite no matter how, you can never make it bipartite again, right? Because once there is an edge, because we are just adding more edges, we are not deleting any edge that was already there. So once this property that there are no edges between pair of vertices of the same set, once this property no longer holds, then it would not hold forever, right? So if I denote a capital B with saying that the bipartite property of this graph remains while adding this edge, right? So we would have this bipartite property until certain edge, and after adding this particular edge, it will no longer be bipartite. So we would have this kind of a situation, and this gives us that we can probably binary search our answer, right? Because this is a monotonic function. There is a single point where the answer changes from being possible to make it from being a bipartite graph to not being a bipartite graph, right? So if I'm at a, so let's prove why binary search would work over here, right? So if I have added x edges, right? If I have added x edges, and if the graph, let's say denoted in shorthand by G, if G is still bipartite, then it is bipartite. All edges less than equal to x. What I mean to say by this is that if you would have added any number of edges less than equal to x, the graph would have still remained bipartite. And the other case is that, and if G is not bipartite, then it implies that adding more edges that is greater than x, it would still remain not bipartite. And you can see the constraints of the question, both n and m go to 10 to the power 5, right? So clearly we cannot add each edge and then do a full BFS or a DFS to check whether graph is bipartite or not, right? I'm not going into how do we check if a graph is bipartite or not. The basic principle is that we do not want any cycles of odd length, right? Because if you had a cycle of odd length, consider a triangle, then if you assign the first vertex as color black, then the next vertex in cyclic order would be white and the next one would be black. And after that, when you cycle back to the first one, then you should say that it is white, right? But it was already assigned black, so that is not possible. In a bipartite graph, we cannot have any odd length cycles. This can be checked with a simple DFS or a BFS. And clearly we cannot add one edge and then keep checking every time, because that would lead us to a solution which is order n square, right? M into n plus n, something of this sort, right? Instead, if we did a binary search on this point as to how many edges have I added till now, right? We wanted to maximize this x. What is the maximum number of edges that I can add? So if I have added x edges till now, and then I can check in order n plus m time if the graph is bipartite or not. And since I'm doing a binary search, then this would lead us to a solution which is n plus n into log base 2 of n, right? So I hope the solution is clear, because once it clicks that we can use binary search over here, the problem is really very easy. So let's quickly code the solution. So we have test cases, and then we have the number of airports and the number of edges that Bob will add. So let's store the edges, and we will be answering all the queries offline, right? Okay. So we know that we can obviously always add at least one edge. So let's just keep the lower bound as 2 and the upper bound will be m, that we can add all edges, and we need another variable answer, which we are initializing with 1 because we can always do that. So while low is less than equal to high, we say that mid low plus high by 2. This stores the number of edges that we have added till now, right? So for int I going from 0 to mid, for the first mid edges, let us add this. Since we have 10 to the power 5 nodes, let's declare a global adjacency list. Okay, and so we would have to clear the list before we start. So we have cleared the list, and now we will start adding the edges. The first number of edges are to be added, and then we are supposed to check if the graph till now is bipartite or not, right? So if we have a function that tells us if the graph is bipartite or not, then we know that this particular number of edges can be added. So we update our answer, and then we update our search space saying that okay, these many number of edges can be added. So now let's try to add more number of edges to check if it is possible to add more number of edges. Otherwise, if it is not bipartite, then these many number of edges cannot be added and we try to reduce our search space. And finally, we would output the answer. So now all that is left is to implement this function is bipartite. So let's do that. So now since we are adding edges between two airports, it might so happen that the entire graph is not connected till yet, right? So we would have to iterate over all the nodes. A kind of multi-BFS is what we are trying to do over here. So we need another array called, let's say, color, in which we assign either 0 or 1, either 1 or 2, depending on, let's say we are painting it white and black. So in the BFS, when we run a BFS, if we ever encounter a node which has already been colored, right? If in the adjacency list, if from one particular node, if we end up on a node that is already colored, and if it is of the same color, then we can say that this is not a bipartite graph, right? Because we have encountered an odd length cycle. Like the triangle example that I had given, if I start giving an arbitrary color to the first vertex and go in a cyclic manner, then it comes down to white, black, white, black. So the first vertex, according to the cyclic order, it should have been black, but we had already given it white. So it's a contradiction, right? And therefore we cannot have a bipartite graph. So basically this is if we have an odd cycle length. So if we have an odd cycle length graph starting at this node, and if this node was not visited, so if color I is equal to 0, let's say that 0 denotes that this node has not been visited till now. And if we have an odd cycle length, then we say that this graph is no longer bipartite and we return false. Otherwise we would return true, right? And let's run this function. Okay, before doing this, since we have multiple test cases and multiple runs, we should ensure that we have set the initial color of each vertex as 0, right? Now we have to implement the function if we have an odd cycle length. So we maintain a queue as BFS, and in this we push the vertex U and arbitrarily assign the color of U as, let's say, 1, which is white. While this BFS queue is not empty, we extract the vertex at the front and then we iterate over all the possible neighbors, over all the adjacent neighbors of this particular node U. Right. If this node has not been visited till now, then we can directly assign the color as the color opposite to the color of its parent. So if its parent was black, then this node should be white and vice versa, right? So if the color of U was equal to 1, then the color of this should be 2, otherwise it should be 1. Else if this node was not 0, that means this node has been already visited. But if this node has the same color, if this node has the same color as its parent, that is color of U, then we have to return true, that is we have found an odd cycle length. Why is this? Because if its color is color U, then according to this I should have assigned it a color which was different from color U, right? But we have found it to be already the same. So this is not possible, and this means that we have found an odd cycle length graph, and so we return true. Otherwise, if everything goes well, we return false. and I think we are good to go. So let's run this. Okay, I've missed out on something. Okay, so either I need to pass n. Okay, so let's pass n. 3 and 5. Okay, so we have some fault over here. This answer should be 3, but we are getting it as 5, right? Okay, so is it a problem that because I have not cleared something? It individually. Oh, getting 5. Let's go over it once again. We take all the edges while our search, while we still have a search space, we clear the adjacency list and then we insert all the edges u comma v for the first mid number of edges, and then we check if the graph is bipartite. Okay, if the graph is bipartite, then answer is mid and low is mid plus 1, otherwise we reduce our search space. This looks good to me. Then in is bipartite, we say that first we initialize all the colors as all the nodes as not visited. We mark them as not visited. And then from each node, if its color is 0, that is if it has not been visited, and we get an odd cycle length from starting a BFS from this node, then we return false. Otherwise we return true. Okay. And over here, okay, I forgot to push this node in the BFS queue, right? So we need to push this into the queue as well. Okay, 3 and 3. So let's submit this. Okay, so this has passed as well. So I hope this problem was also clear, and I hope that all the other problems were clear as well. If you are still having any doubts, then you can also go through the editorials that are over here, or you may directly ask anyone from the Society of Grimoire of Code. Good luck to you, and that's all for this video editorial. Thank you.